And finally, build a community. No one does big things by themselves.
Hi, I'm Alexa. Would you like to air party? Let's use internet like a phone, not like library. Bring people together behind their screens. Let's stop being the center of the circle. Be the circle.
Hi, Patrick.
Hello.
I'm very pleased to get you on my podcast about community builders and tools for community builders. And so you're the co-founder CEO of Orbit, and maybe you can just explain the whole origin of Orbit, your company.
Yeah, happy to share the background and very excited to be here today. So Orbit is a community experience platform, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. But I'll go back in time a little bit to your question and tell you a little bit about the origin. So my co-founder Josh and I met many years ago at a company called Keen.io, and Keen was an analytics API and had a very large developer community. And at Keen, there were tens of thousands of developers on the platform. Josh was VP of engineering, and I was director of customer success. And at Keen, that's where we had a front row seat to the power of community as a strategic driver of all sorts of business value. Everything from new user acquisition to product feedback to finding bugs to general go to market. And that really is I would say where the Orbit story started. After Keen, Josh went to Algolia and built the DevRel team there. I went to a company called Figure Eight and was director of customer success. And then in 2018, Josh and I reunited to build a consultancy called Developer Mode. And Developer Mode was a developer relations, developer go-to-market consultancy. And we worked with dozens of companies around the world of all sizes, from seed and Series A up to companies as big as Square and Snowflake. And we had sort of an inside view of what was happening in terms of developer communities at all stages. And a couple of things were happening that we were observing. One is that I think it was the first round review published a study in late 2019. And there was this one observation that said something like 80 or 85% of founders view their community as a moat, as competitive differentiation. And, that idea was pretty top of mind for a lot of people. Another thing that was happening is that more and more companies were based on that study and based on the sort of general trends in the market, asking themselves, how do we invest in community? We saw that investors and board members were asking their founders, what's your DevRel strategy? What's your community strategy? And
Well, yeah.
and even though there was increasing demand for operationalization and really professionalization of those roles, we realized that there's no tooling around the space. And even worse, there was underlying this question a little bit of a linguistic or philosophical distinction. And what I mean by that is, at the consultancy, at Developer Mode, every company we spoke with, we were working with community builders, developer advocates, people thinking about driving software adoption, and their struggles internally were with folks in the executive suite and asking questions like, what's the ROI? How many leads did we get from the meetup? And questions that are very sort of sales and marketing based. And we realized that at the core of this challenge was a linguistic challenge. And so what I mean by that is that if you think about the predominant commercial metaphor for the past 100 years, it's been the sales and marketing funnel. And yeah, believe it or not, the funnel as a concept was first coined in 1898. And it's we like to say a lot has changed since then. And the thing about the sales and marketing funnel is that it is a useful mental model when the outcome that you're going for is linear and binary. So this could be an enterprise sale or a product onboarding. Sometimes it's useful to model a linear process. But if you know anything about communities, community is not linear, it's not binary. And people sort of land where they're going to land based on what their needs are at that given moment. And if you think especially about open source communities, there more often than not, there are lots of community members who are creating a lot of value for the community,
Yeah, it's not
through
the same KPI.
yeah, they're participating in the forums, they're creating guest content, and those folks that are creating value in the community may never pay
Mm.
the company a dollar because they're on a free plan, not the community plan. And so, yeah, and so the sales and marketing funnel as a model doesn't really account for those value creating activities. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so realizing this, we realized that there really needed to be a better map for the terrain. And so this brings us to the orbit model as a concept. And the orbit model is for us really a reimagination from first principles about how communities grow and expand and sometimes contract. And it's essentially an alternative and a complement to the sales and marketing funnel, but it's a tool set for people thinking about software adoption and community building to really understand the size of their community, the shape of their community. Today, the orbit model lives on GitHub. You can find it there. You can read all of the sort of nuance and the formulas and things like that. But yeah, the orbit model as a concept is really how we got into the space. And I would say Orbit, the company and the platform that we've built, really has emerged from the first principles of the orbit model. So the orbit model really started out as a blog post for the consultancy, and it was basically quote unquote thought leadership. But a number of companies started to reach out and say, yeah, we like the orbit model a lot. Do you have anything other than a blog post? Is there anything we can? How do we use it? And that's what got us thinking about building a company around the concept. And basically, building on the orbit model, providing a suite of tools to help companies and community builders really start to understand who's in the community and figure out how to start scaling their engagement. So hopefully that's not too long of an answer, but that's a little bit of the history about who we are and how we got here.
I got so many questions about what do you explain why the community building is so mature in the developer world, and it's not in other kind of jobs. It's all the advocacy thing, the framework you just build, and it just makes sense for that part of tech. But so how do you explain that the developer world was so mature from this point of view?
Yeah, great question. I think it comes back to the types of companies and the types of customers. So what I mean by that is that in developer world, I would totally agree with you that community and advocacy are much more mature than other verticals. Uh, a big part of that is if you think about the the way that developers buy and the way they make decisions is different than if we're going to the grocery store and buying a bag of potato chips. It's because the developers are making very important decisions. It's decisions about infrastructure and tooling and technologies, and these decisions are closely related to their professional ability to create and to earn a paycheck. If you pick the wrong framework, if you spend 2 years learning the wrong framework, um, you're going to have to figure out how to come back from that. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's one example. Or if you're a mid-level engineer and you're in a meeting with your CTO and you recommend a framework that's not proven, there's
Yeah.
a lot on the line. And so
Yeah.
what we see is that the stakes are very high, and as a result, the expectations are high. And one of the things that we've noticed is that software isn't really sold so much as it's adopted. And what I mean by that is that when a developer is exploring a new tool or technology, think about the process they go through. They Google it. They creep around the Stack Overflow discussions. They find the forum or the Discord or the Slack and see what types of conversations are happening. They look under the hood of the GitHub repo and see, is this project active? Are people contributing? What's the culture of the people? Or is the documentation good? They're probably going to find some conference talks. And what they're not going to do typically is go to the marketing website and download a white paper. It just doesn't make any sense for a developer. And so what they want to do in the sort of course of adoption is understand who else is using the tool, what are they saying, what's the culture like, what's the documentation like, and as a result, my theory is that developer tooling, developer community, software companies, they've gotten good at community and advocacy as a result of the go to market approach. The bottom up product led growth, requires all of these ancillary activities and materials. So an active community with a great forum, great documentation, lots of examples, explainer code, tutorials. And so, I think that's really the shape of the go to market has influenced the role of community and advocacy inside of these companies. I would say what we're seeing more broadly, I think especially in consumer world, is community as a go to market tool as well. If you think about all the D2C brands today, everyone's they have forums, they have private Slack channels, they have paid communities some of the times, and so this sort of adoption centric approach versus the traditional sales motion is taking over more and more of the way companies create value. And I think the distinction between adoption and sales is a pretty useful one to sort of track the growth of community as an important part of a company.
Yeah, it's interesting because you told me just 2 minutes ago you came from the customer success world. What is the difference and the articulation between these two worlds, customer success and community thing? Because it's so near, it's a blurring line, and even when I saw a great head of community jobs and company who want to be bullish on this kind of thing, how do you think that will evolve side to the customer success thing?
So the overlap between community
Yeah.
advocacy, adoption, and customer success, there's a lot of overlap. And in fact, when we were starting Orbit, one of the things that I noticed is that the conversations and the discussions that were happening in developer relations world were really similar to early conversations that were happening in customer success world. Questions like, how do we hire more people? How do we evolve our leadership to have more senior people? What tooling should we use? I would say one big difference is a little cultural, because customer success really grew up in the context of the sort of linear handoff from marketing to sales to success. And it presumes, typically there's sort of two types of customer success. There's like a high touch model where the CSMs are very engaged. It's a higher contract value, and then there's another type of customer success where it's a lower touch model, and one CSM might be responsible for hundreds or thousands of accounts. And I would say that customer success world is very, very heavily premised largely on commercial outcomes like renewal and retention. And so the vast majority of customer success organizations are going to be thinking about, what's the compensation model for the CSM team? What's the on target earnings? What's the renewal rate we're going after? And it's interesting. It sort of feels very commercial, and that's not a problem. That's a very effective way to run an organization. But because if you think about incentives, so much in life comes back to incentive design. If your customer success team is thinking mainly about contract renewal and expansion, that means they're going to be thinking about existing customers, specifically customers that are high value, who are likely to renew, and they're going to be focused on working with the people who can make the decision about whether or not to renew. And that usually means executive engagement and getting buy-in and traditional, I would say, approaches to navigating accounts and understanding who the decision makers are, who the champion is, things like that. I would say that's a distinct set of activities from community. I would say community it spans the customer journey and really is more inclusive of an individual person, whether or not they are a customer. And so what I mean by that is that an active community, a high gravity community is what we would say in Orbit world, is one that is creating a lot of value for the community and for the world. And that means things like having really rich conversations in the forum, answering people's questions, producing really great content. And the reality is someone might show up to the community read some blog posts, learn something, and then go away and never return. But they've benefited from the creative act of that community. And I would say that's a win. That's a positive outcome for society. Um, and if you zoom out and think about the role of community in a company, it's really it has lots of leverage across that customer journey. So, sort of before someone becomes a customer, once someone learns about a brand and they're exploring and deciding whether or not to adopt the tool, the community is very valuable. And then after the sale, as someone's trying to get implemented and onboarded, the community is standing by to help that happen. And then the end of that journey is the sort of the example person here who's kind of gone from not knowing about the brand to being a user. Now they're members of the community who can help everyone else at those other stages. So it's sort of a virtuous cycle. And investing in community really is investing in the sort of it in terms of customer success. It's kind of interesting because it is really investing in the success of your user base, but it's also more broadly investing in the success of anyone that comes into contact. And so I think to answer your question, it's a difference in focus. If customer success teams are focused on the commercial renewal of existing business, a community team is sort of looking more broadly out into the world and saying, how do we create value for the world versus capturing value from our existing user base? So that's kind of how I think about it. I've seen the differences.
Yeah, customer success obey to the, like you say, the marketing sales framework. And so let's say I want to to become a head of community of a great company. Which KPIs should I to convince my boss to to give him some analytics and something concrete?
Yeah. So KPIs are a big topic of discussion in this space. Uh, we think about a couple of different types of KPIs. It's starting with the community. It's, for most companies, it's important just to understand who is in the community, what they're doing, and when they did those things. And so in the Orbit model, we have this concept of an activity, and an activity is really any verb that's important to your community. So that could be, open to pull request, spoke at a conference, attended the meetup, answered a question in a forum. Yeah, any of those activities that people do that you would say, yeah, this is important. And we know if people are doing these activities, it means they're leaning in, it means they're engaged, it means they have high love. And so as a baseline, we recommend understanding, who is in the community and what they're doing. And if you understand who's there and what they're doing and when they did it, you can actually model a lot of things about who's really engaged, who's got a lot of love, who's fading, who did a bunch of activities 6 months ago and they haven't done one lately. That's all really useful information to just understand the shape of the community. We would say the distribution of your Orbit models, or your Orbit levels. So there's some tracking you would want to do as the community manager, the community leader, to understand what's going on in the community. Those numbers roll up into some measures like love is a thing we measure in the Orbit model and the Orbit platform.
Yeah. I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems kind of silly, but it's basically the roll up of across all of your community platforms. If you're using a forum plus Twitter plus GitHub plus internal tooling, love is really the high level trend line of people's willingness to participate in your community. And that's a pretty good measure to start with. Now, the reality is, as it stands today, most executives aren't familiar with the Orbit model and measuring love. It might sound kind of silly for them. And so some things that we encourage people to do is to start to close the loop between the engaged community and business metrics. And one of the things that we say a lot is that business metrics, like, for example, revenue, is actually a second order effect of a highly active, high gravity community. And it's to use another metaphor, you can't force a plant to grow, but you can, ensure that there's fertilizer in the soil, that the plant's getting good sunlight, that it's getting watered frequently. So you can measure the inputs of that activity, but the outputs are you can't make them happen. And it's a little similar to things like revenue. If you're trying to drive revenue from your community, you can't force revenue to happen, but you can create the conditions such that the positive outcomes occur. And so by measuring love and understanding your orbit levels, that's you're starting to understand the inputs, and then closing the loop on those outputs will look different from company to company. But one of the things we're working on in Orbit, the platform, is helping you understand questions like, okay, of all the users that converted from free to paid in Q4, who was most active on which platforms? Here, this cohort of users, it turns out anybody that's really active in the forum is more likely to convert to paid, or the people that were really proactive about reaching out to and engaging with in the community, we can now show that their lifetime value is higher or their churn rate is lower. And so this is sort of where we're trying to get in the tool and the model, is really closing the loop between community input and business output. Right now, the gap is tough for most companies, because if you think about where community happens, it's across all the different channels. And most companies have a spreadsheet. They have a spreadsheet with a tab for new Twitter followers. Yeah, and like new pull requests. That's kind of the fundamental technological problem that we started to solve with Orbit, is really unifying those actions, those activities across all the different platforms, and trying to provide for the first time this single view of the community member in one place. And so you can see in sort of one interface, when someone started the repository and did a pull request, and then a month later they followed you on Twitter, and then 2 weeks later they joined the forum, and then 2 weeks later they converted to a paid user. And seeing that journey is really informative to understanding how community members are moving through the different community platforms and ultimately engaging with the business. So yeah, that's it's sort of an ongoing, I would say, R&D effort for us to continue to close that loop. But what we're finding is that really just providing the baseline of who's out in the community and what are they doing is a pretty good start for most companies, and that leads to meaningful conversations with the executive team. And so you can show them charts like, here's when we did our virtual event, and then within a week, activities increased. And so maybe that means, depending on the community, it means more Twitter engagement, it means more activity in the forum, and then 2 weeks later, signups increased. So these are the types of conversations that our customers at Orbit are starting to have with their leadership teams, and it's a lot more evolved, I would say, than prior experiences where the community managers got a bunch of spreadsheets and they're trying to say, well, we got more stars on the repo, therefore that means more revenue. So it's it's an ongoing journey, but we're trying to help up level the conversations a bit and help make them more strategic.
I don't know who say this sentence, but let's say great good leaders have followers, but great leaders create other leaders. And when I that helped me in my community building process, because when I don't know where to go, each time I say to myself, your goal, it's not to make this community to make growth or retention thing. It's all about create other leaders. So in that sense, do you think that a great community, it's a nest of yes, future leaders, but the origin maybe of in the beginning of your distribution networks of future partners? And so what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's actually, so it's a really great quote, and it's, I would say, consistent with what we've seen working really well for especially early stage communities. So when I think about the types of companies that we work with, it's kind of a bimodal distribution. On one end, it's the bigger companies like Postman and Circle CI and Apollo GraphQL. They've got big teams, huge communities, big open source projects. But we also have a lot of users, a lot of Orbit customers that are early stage open source projects and open source companies, and the questions that they have are very different than the types of questions that, for example, Apollo GraphQL is asking. Apollo's got a big team of advocates and educators and things like that. So for the early stage companies and projects, we're often talking to the founders, and so they're actually the ones coming to Orbit, creating an account, and trying to essentially standardize their go-to-market efforts on the Orbit platform, which is really, really interesting. And what we see work really well for them, and this is coming back to your point, is that instead of trying to just grow the community at all costs, um, that which leads to diluted effort. What we recommend and what we see work really well is building a small group of high love community members. We would call that your Orbit One. Some companies might call that a champions program or an MVP program, and it's this idea. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's, finding those people, identifying them, and then inviting them into the conversation in a more specific way, and that usually looks like, um, you know, providing them with influence over the product roadmap, and then giving them access to new features before the general public, and spending a lot of time getting to know, really understanding what their challenges are and what they're solving for. That we have seen be a really great way to sort of build momentum early, because to your point, they all become leaders. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're gonna become some formalized leadership role inside the community, but they'll be the people that are raising their hand to answer questions in the forum, that are willing to like get on customer calls. I mean, we've seen this at Orbit. We have a small user community of early adopters of our platform. We're still in early access, so we're sort of slowly letting people onto the platform, and we've got about 160 170 people in our Slack community. And those folks have been just really phenomenal in terms of giving us feedback and sharing ideas and influencing the roadmap. And even for fundraising, like they've been willing to um, have conversations with our potential investors and vouch for us and say, yeah, like these Orbit people, they're doing good stuff. And so, we've tried to invest heavily in our Orbit One, and it's really paid a lot of dividends. And as we think about scaling our go-to-market and scaling our community, those are the people sort of at the center of things that have helped us refine our messaging and positioning and shape the product. And when we move to general availability sometime in Q1, the shape of Orbit, the platform, is going to look a lot like what they want it to look like, which is interesting. So there's a nice, I would say, quid pro quo with your early champions, such that they give you advice. They're not going to be too hard on you. They tell their friends, but at the same time, that means we as the community builders and the product builders, uh, we move things for them if they have ideas or feedback. We make sure it happens really quickly. So yeah, and to your point about creating more leaders, that some of the earliest folks, I'll just give a shout out to Jeremy Mice from Circle CI. He was one of our earliest users and one of the most active people in our forums. And he's there, letting us know when there's a bug. He's very good at that. But when other new users join the Slack and have questions, he's half the time answers the question before we can get to it. So it's pretty cool to see that working.
Wow. And in terms of members, what is your ideal members, your perfect members, the persona? Is it a developer leader or maybe another profile?
Yeah, so it's I would say we have a number of types of users and community members, but they all have a few things in common. So there's we have folks that are open source maintainers for their own projects. We have people who are developer advocates for large companies. We have people who are director and VP of community and DevRel at some larger companies. Um, so it's interesting to see the sort of
Wow.
types of questions and challenges all those folks are facing. At the core, I think of it all is a desire on the part of our community members. They're all people who are making stuff for other people. They're, whether it's a small open source project that they maintain, or if they're the VP of DevRel for a huge company,
Mm.
they're all trying to focus their own
Mm.
efforts and their team's efforts around creating value for their communities. So it's pretty neat for us to be able to see the shape of those efforts across geographies and company sizes and verticals. But yeah, it's all people that are trying to figure out how to create as much value for their community.
It's all community builders.
Yeah,
Definitely
yeah.
all
I would
community
say
builders.
there's a handful of at this point, a couple of like marketers in the community, um, but these are marketing people for companies where community is huge. We have some product people in the community now, because product managers are trying to understand who are the users, what are they doing, and the community is a great way to go, great way to get that information. So yeah, but far and away, the people thinking about creating communities, building things that communities love is who we've got in the community so far.
I just saw in your blog that you want to switch your, not to switch, but to get your model adopted by other kind of people than developer. You still want that your Orbit model um, could be applied by I don't know non-developer
Yeah,
guys.
totally. What we think is that, at the core of the Orbit model concept is this idea of creating value versus capturing value. And and if for any type of community, if that's important, then the Orbit model is a useful framework for measuring the sort of love and reach of the community. And so, it's very developer centric now, because we love developer community building, and that's, all of our customers are developer communities. But the principles in the Orbit model are applicable no matter what type of community, whether you're a musician or a creator or an author. Wanting to understand who is the community and what they're doing, is should be on your radar. And if you look at the docs on GitHub, yeah, right now the examples are fairly.
We'll put the link in the show notes. It's incredible. I see planets, I see space, I see satellites. Everything is perfectly clear. It's the first time I get in 1 second what is community building. It's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. And we think that really for any new business, whether you're a software company or like selling on Shopify or Etsy, attracting your first couple hundred, 1,000 customers, that looks more like community building than it does traditional linear sales and marketing. And so, that's kind of what we believe about the future of the way companies go to market. It looks a lot like building a community.
So in the Orbit model, can we just dive 2 seconds into this? So you have a center of gravity at the beginning of everything, as I can see. And you just when you're a community builder, you just want to get as many advocates as you can gather.
Yeah, great question. So, the I would say that so there's four levels, four Orbit levels of people. There's observers, participants, contributors, and advocates, and those are labels that can vary from community to community, but it's trying to capture this idea that different people will have different love at different stages of their engagement with you. And unlike the sales and marketing funnel, the Orbit model is not necessarily striving to push everyone to Orbit 1, to the advocate level, because some people just, they're not ready. They may just want to come and read your blog, and that's okay. Really, so the goal is really well, to zoom out a bit, there's two sort of underlying measures in the Orbit model. There's love and there's reach. And love is a member's level of engagement with your community, and that's measured by the recency and frequency of their activities. And then the reach part is basically how influential is this person? What type of ability do they have to attract more people to this community? And that's practically a function of things like Twitter followers, number of newsletter subscribers, GitHub followers, things like that. And so what you want to do is understand the love and reach of each community member, and also the love and reach of the community overall. And the goal then is as the community builder is to thinking about those two metrics. The love and reach combined start to imply the level of gravity for a person and for the community. It's a lot of metaphors, I realize, but we like the word gravity because it says something about the attractive force of an individual and the community overall. And so now as a community builder, my job is not to force people to a certain level, but it's to say, how do I increase the love and the reach of everybody in this community? And so now it's a question about value creation instead of value capture. And what I mean by that is, uh, how, let's just workshop it. What are some ways to increase a person's reach? Well, you could retweet their content. You could invite them to write a guest blog post. You could invite them to speak at your conference. There's lots of ways to increase the reach of an individual community member. How do you increase love? Well, you know one silly example is you send them really nice swag. If they do a pull request, you send them a T-shirt. You can right. You can make sure their question is answered in the forum. You can deliver a really great experience in the docs. So really, by thinking about reach and love, we decompose the question into more interesting parts of the problem, and this, not to sort of keep banging on the sales and marketing funnel, but in that world, if you're applying a funnel methodology, it's all about optimizing each step and trying to get as much as you can from each step. And it's really, and it can be an extractive process. But when we think about community building, it should be more coming from a place of abundance, should be a generative process. And so by thinking about how do we increase love and how do we drive reach, now you as a company and as a community can start to have meaningful conversations about the activities that are going to have those outcomes. And then it's less about like individual people and making them like go to the next step, and more about asking yourself, what's the thing that we can offer a person to drive these outcomes that we're interested in. So that's kind of how we.
Well, what I do appreciate in this framework, there is no difference in your model between the in and the out thing. Let me explain that. I used to see this problem of in and out in many communities, and this inside and outside thing is okay, you make great thing in your community, okay, with your members, but it's private, okay? So how can you promote your great stuff inside your community, your gold, outside this community? It's a kind of egg and chicken problem. So what I love in your orbit model is that there is no two circles. It's one circle, and you the more the member increase love, and the more the member increase reach inside or outside, it's good for the community. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% correct. It's really it's about removing barriers, I think, and it just comes back to that idea of creating value for whoever happens to come into our orbit for no matter how long. I would
Mm-hmm.
say that I think it's one distinction could be that you know for most of the people we're talking to about the orbit model, they're for lack of a better term, commercial communities, in the sense that there's kind of a company underlying the community that they're building. So the revenue model is different. The community is a thing that they can create, and the second order effect is signups for the product, for example. What you're talking about could be for where the community is the product, and the paid subscription is the goal. And so I do think in that model it's a little more difficult to figure out how to what's the second order effect. Is so for an open source company, the second order effect is free users who convert to paid users. For a paid community, it's a little more difficult, I think.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I don't even know if it's possible, because this model, I think it's a club model. It's a
Yeah.
model of a clubs. Maybe do you have news to push for the rest of the year, or what is your next step in 2021 for Orbit?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So we just released our Discourse integration, which we're really excited about. Lots of folks
Great.
are on Discourse. Yeah, and so it gives you the ability to, have charts and graphs, of course, about what's going on in your Discourse. But just like all of the other integrations, it allows you to see Discourse activity right alongside what's going on Twitter, on GitHub, and so you can actually see for an individual community member, when they joined your forum, when they asked a question, when they answered a question, when they tweeted, all in the same view. And what's cool about that, one thing that I like is that With the increasing number of integrations, it makes Orbit's search functionality really popular, really powerful. And so you can almost think of the search functionality as like a unified search box for your community, no matter where it happens. And so, by searching, for example, JavaScript in the search bar, the results will pull back everything, including people that have tweeted about JavaScript, people have asked questions in the forum about JavaScript, the names of repositories people have contributed to. It's a pretty great way to really get to know and discover your community. So the discourse integration has gone really well for us. And coming up next is a Slack integration.
Everybody wants the Slack integration. I'm pretty sure that
everyone does. Yeah, it's quite interesting, and it's fun to think about because there's actually two parts of the approach that actually may end up being two separate apps. But on one hand, for most companies, they want an Orbit app inside their company Slack to look up community members, to like add notes to profiles, things like that. And then on the other side of the coin, you have a community Slack where the community happens. And for there, you want to understand who's the most active, who's answering the questions, like what are the topics that are happening. And so, yeah, we're getting to solve this challenge for companies and communities to help them get the most out of their Slack community, because, even for us, we've got 150, 160 people in the Slack, and it's hard to understand what's going on. And I can't even see who's my most active members. And so, soon we're going to help solve this problem for the world. So that's coming up. It'll be in beta, hopefully by the end of the year. And then, by Q1, that'll mean we'll have integrations with GitHub, with Slack, with Discord, and Twitter, with much more coming. Discord's coming next. So, pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah. Great roadmap for Orbit. So thanks a lot, Patrick, to talk with us in my podcast, and I wish you the best for 2021. Take care, Patrick, and see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks.